All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Ideas online discussion, Indigenous Children's Access to Education Before and During COVID-19. I believe that if our panelists are here, you're welcome to switch on your video so that we can present our faces to the world, to the participants who have just joined us. Okay, hello, good morning to everyone. So our moderator today later will be Wan Yashin, and she's also going to be presenting something to you. Yashin will introduce all of the speakers and do them justice with the biographies. So I would just like to thank all the three panelists, the distinguished panelists for joining us this morning at this webinar. So my name is Trisha Yeo. I am the CEO of Ideas. I'm just going to spend about 5 minutes with some opening and welcoming remarks, and then I will excuse myself and come back in as a participant, and our able manager of the social policy unit, Wan Yashin, will take over managing the rest of the webinar. So for those of you who are not aware, Ideas, the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs. We are an independent, not-for-profit think tank that works on promoting evidence-based policy making. Our vision is to see a Malaysia that's premised on liberty and justice, following the founding father, Tunku Abdul Rahman's words during independence. Our mission is to achieve this through a range of public policy research and public advocacy, as well as advocacy to policymakers. We are aiming at building a competitive economy, having an inclusive Malaysia, and ensuring trust in institutions. And the pillar on having an inclusive Malaysia, where we look at inclusive and sustainable growth and development, is precisely the work that is reflected in the paper that we are launching today, that was released yesterday. The paper that has been authored by Wan Yashin is titled Education Policies in Overcoming Barriers Faced by Orang Asli Children, Education for All. I'm very pleased with this very detailed policy paper, which actually sets a baseline study for the next stage of our research, where we're going to actually engage in surveys and primary research, talking to the actual Orang Asli communities themselves with regards to the barriers that they face in education. But before we get there, I thought I would spend just a couple of minutes sharing with you how Orang Asli as a community and the issues faced by them are very close to my heart. In my prior life, when I was the research officer to the Selangor Menteri Besar, Tan Sri Khalid Ibrahim, all the way back in 2009, I was part of the team that actually successfully persuaded the Menteri Besar to withdraw as an appellant in the land rights case in the federal court. This was the now renowned, and I believe it has set a precedence for future cases. It's called the Sagong Tasi case. So what happened was that prior to 2008, prior to the new government, the federal government and the state government actually pursued a case with a set of Orang Asli within the area of Bukit Lanjan in Damansara area. And the Orang Asli actually won the case, and the federal court, the federal government and the Selangor state government had pursued appealing against the Orang Asli, but we successfully achieved the goal of withdrawing from the appeal. And this really set a good precedence because it showed that the then government took into consideration land rights of the Orang Asli. And of course, consequently, there were many positive things that took place as well. The Selangor government actually hired Janita Enggi, who was a special assistant, and she was leading and part of the Selangor Orang Asli Land Task Force. And following that, in 2010, the Orang Asli themselves were given land titles, and I was actually there during the ceremony, and it was a really great moment because they felt they had not been given a voice up to then. And of course, today we're exploring something very different, not about land rights, but about education. And I have also personally, I spent many Saturdays in my youth going into Orang Asli villages and providing some tuition classes, and I visited many villages across Malaysia, not just in Selangor, but in Perak as well. And I do see many of the issues that arise, which have been talked about in Yashin's policy paper. I think among the many policy recommendations that she has put forward, I really greatly value the last two. Yes, the first few are also greatly important, talking about education, but the last two really tells us that the voice of Orang Asli communities must be respected and included in the formulation of policies and programs. I strongly believe that because while the government has done great efforts in trying to promote education amongst Orang Asli, I think the voice of these communities have not been heard strongly enough, and they have not been given enough agency, which has been, a failing, I would believe, of the system. And then the other recommendation that I also felt strongly about was that there has been a mismatch of Orang Asli values and culture with mainstream education. And so she recommends that there should be a re-examination of the education system, which currently emphasizes competition and competency. Competition may not be necessarily the thing that Orang Asli communities themselves aspire towards. So I think there's a lot of questions that these raise. So it's not just Orang Asli, but the entire Orang Asal community, right? Also in Sabah and Sarawak, basically the indigenous communities of the whole country. The last thing that I would like to say is that I think what has happened this year with the pandemic, COVID-19 has also stripped off the facade of our education system, and it shows us just how fragile certain vulnerable communities can be and what their conditions are, especially in accessing education. Of course, we know the news that made headlines and the pictures as well of Vuna having to climb a tree to access internet for her own class education. And that's one instance, but how many other children have not been able to access good education this year because of the pandemic and because of the lack of internet access? But I'm very, very glad and proud to see that there's been so much interest in this policy paper, in the issues that we're trying to put forward. And the panel that we have today is an excellent panel. We have Prof. Bahari, Dr. Sumati, and Anne Nasimbang. And as I said, the bios will be introduced shortly by Wan Yashin. But I'm very pleased to have all of you on board. This is an area that we hope to expand more on. And in the coming year, we will be doing more on Orang Asli research. So with that, I thank you all for joining us this morning, and I wish you a successful panel discussion. And I will now pass the time to Wan Yashin, and I will excuse myself. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Tricia. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Yeah, I think just before I go into the presentation, I just want to talk a little bit about how this started. I think one of the often asked question is why are you interested in this topic? Why is Ideas interested in this topic? You are not an Orang Asli. Why is it of your concern? Why are you speaking up for them as well? I think is in this situation, I think we have to look at this not as who is the Orang Asli to us as well as Malaysians, right? They are not someone other, but they are our own fellow Malaysians. So I think it's a national issue. It's not just an Orang Asli or Orang Asal education issue. It's not just theirs, but it's ours. So I think this is where each and every one of us should own it as well. This is our country's issue, our education issue. And we should be concerned with it because they are part of our country. They are our fellow Malaysians. So with it, I think how it started was when I visited an Orang Asli village back in some time ago. And I saw that how the narratives and what is the children that I met there is very different. How do you see a friendly, active kid could not excel in school? What's the problem behind? And you also see like initiatives by the community, building out community learning centers, their effort and initiative and aspiration to provide education for their children is something that we often don't talk about. We often only neglected the fact that the parents do aspire for their children to have education as well. Of course, there is a mixed. So it's not about forcing upon them what we think is right. I think it's about how do we have a platform for discussion, coming together as Malaysians, or everyone together to see how can we provide good quality education and provide the access to these children. Yeah. So, and also not just Orang Asli, I think Orang Asli as well. I work with some children, tutoring them online. So this is a very precious opportunity for me, I think personally, because they are close to my heart as well. And we want the best for them, especially during this pandemic where Sabah has the cases is very high right now. So what will happen to them after so many months of no school? Yeah. So this is something that we want to discuss today. And I think this is something that each and every one of us, regardless if you're Orang Asal or not, you're Orang Asli or not, it doesn't matter. As long as we are Malaysians, I think we should be in it together and to respect each other's value and culture as well. Yeah. So just to go into the presentation. So the title of the paper is basically, yeah, maybe you can put on the slides. Thank you. Yeah. So just to go back on what Tricia has mentioned, so this paper is the first of two-part series. The first part is basically more policy oriented, and we are aware of that. It's also because of the pandemic that we could not go to the villages and schools to do survey at this time. So the first part actually looks at the policy, and we base the challenges on previous studies. So there are many studies that have been done on Orang Asli children. So that's where we documented the challenges that they face, and also some of the impacts of the programs and policies that are for them. So this project started in January this year. So, and the next part of the series is basically where we want to go and meet the communities. We want to go to the schools and to understand further what's the gaps between these programs and what they are facing on the ground. I think also to understand a bit from the teachers and the schools as well, headmasters, what they are facing on the ground. So this is it's a two-part study. So this is not like the finished complete work yet. Maybe next slide. So we have seen that Malaysia achievement in education have been significant. We have a near universal enrollment rate of 97% for primary school level and around 96% for lower secondary and 84% for upper secondary. Literacy rate for youths was around 96.9% in 2018. And public expenditure in our public primary and secondary schools is comparable to other developed countries. So, but there are still gaps persist between Orang Asli and their non-Indigenous peers. So we can see in 2008, secondary school completion rate, if you compare the national average, is 72%. But as compared to Orang Asli student, it's only 30%. So meaning to say 10 Orang Asli students who started school in standard 1, only around 3 or 4 of them will finish secondary school. In 2014, it has improved this rates. So it has improved to 59% in 2014. So what about the dropouts? So we often hear about the dropout rates that is very high, transition rates is very low for Orang Asli. And that's also one of the main focus of our Orang Asli transformation plan under the Malaysia Education Blueprint. So if you look at the national dropout and the Orang Asli dropout. So the national dropout is the blue bottom line, and the Orang Asli dropout is the orange line above. So in 2016, there's 70% of the Orang Asli that drop out. So this is from primary school to secondary school. So this is only that transition year. And then you see the increase to 26% in 2017, and then a decrease to 23%. So you can see a very vast difference between the Orang Asli as compared to the national average. So maybe to understand a bit of who are the Orang Asli. So as we can see here, that's the number of total of Orang Asli according to JAQUA. There's 138,000 of Orang Asli in the country. Predominantly, they stay in Pahang and Perak. So, like mentioned, Orang Asli is not a homogeneous group. So there are 3 main subgroups and 18 sub-ethnic groups. So the main subgroups we can see on the right is the biggest proportion and majority of them are from Proto Malay. Sorry, there's an error there. Oh, sorry, Senoi is the biggest category, and then we have Proto Malay and then Negrito. So, and on the left, you can see the sub-ethnic groups of each main category. So the rest of Orang Asli children is protected by the Education Act 1996, Section 9A, which is that primary education is made compulsory. And they're also protected by the Federal Constitution and Aboriginal Peoples Act 1954. So the UN DREAP also covers a range of rights for the indigenous people, including the rights to education and the rights to self-determination. So rights to self-determination means that they have the right to determine their policy, they have the right to determine where they want to develop as a community. So looking back into education per se, so Orang Asli students comprise of 4% of the national student population, approximately. So if you look at the graph, in terms of total enrollment, so this is the number of enrollment, it's not the enrollment rates. So total enrollment you see is almost the same. The blue dark bar is almost the same throughout from 2011 to 2017. So there are approximately, there are 94 Orang Asli primary schools with 5 special model K9 schools in the country. So most of them are in Perak and Pahang, which is predominantly where most Orang Asli live. So K9 school is a comprehensive school model starting from primary 1 to form 3. So we look at the completion rate. I think sometimes we focus so much on the enrollment numbers and enrollment rate, but the completion rate is also equally important. How many students actually finish school? So looking at the Form 5 completion rate, 2012 to 2014, that's the data that we have. We can see that in terms of it's getting better. So from 57 to, but there's a drop in between, and then it improves to 59%. But in terms of the numbers of students that completed, it's actually an increase, yeah. So this is the transition rate and the dropout rate. So the transition dropouts is declining. You can see from 2007 to 2016, the dropout has declined from 56% to 17%. But in 2017, there is an increase again and decreased back to in 2018. So dropouts is basically how many of them, this is a transition rate, like I mentioned before this, from standard 6 to form 1, how many of them actually retained to and go to secondary school. So looking from a state level perspective, it's quite interesting to see that dropouts is very low in Perak, Kedah, and Johor. And you can see that many of the Orang Asli actually live in Perak. So this seems to show that there is disparity, and you see there's a very high dropout rates in Kelantan and Terengganu, as well as Selangor, as well as Persekutuan, which is predominantly nearer to the urban areas. So this is something interesting that I think we should look further into. Why is there a disparity between the states? So it can be many different reasons. Yeah, so it can be different kind of like the initiatives at the state level, and also the support that is given by the district and the state level might be different. But it also can be like initiatives by the NGOs and civil society at this respective states. So we cannot conclude for sure why is there a disparity, but this is something interesting to look at. So looking at the barriers and challenges. So you can see a long list here. So if you think this is a long list, this is just a concise version. And I don't think this list itself can do enough justice to the stories behind, actually. So it's just a summary version, and this is basically collected from previous studies, and also from what we understand talking to people working on the ground. So like I mentioned before, because of the pandemic, we were unable to do the field work, which we were actually wanting to go and meet the communities. So what we did was actually to talk to key leaders and also people that have worked on the ground with them, civil society organizations, and also experts as well that is working on the topic. So this is basically a review of what they have done. Yeah. So looking at socioeconomic background, so what are the main challenges for them? So we roughly categorize it into 4 different categories. So in terms of poverty, I think, so we know that often education is said to enhance social mobility, but poverty is also one of the main barriers in accessing education. So in what we gather from the stats is in 2009, Orang Asli has a 49% of poverty rate versus 3.9% of the national poverty rate at that time. So we are unable to find the more recent numbers because most of the poverty rate for Orang Asli is actually aggregated together with the Bumiputra as a bigger, larger group. Yeah. So some of the stories behind, like Wong and Abdullah has done a research in a community in Pahang, found that monthly income of their research interviewees was less than 300 ringgit. And most of them do not have a permanent job and were classified as hardcore poor. So what are the, poverty is not a direct cause of not having education or access to education and learning. So there has some repercussion to that. So the first thing is going to school requires financial resources. Even though school, there's no tuition fee, they still have other fees that they will need to spend on. Then the second thing is on the trade-off at the time to earn a livelihood. They could have helped their families to plant or to do some other work that can bring in an income. Third is that it's limited or no access to supplementary class. So for example, if an urban student is not doing well in their studies, parents can afford to send them to tuition classes and to provide them with educational programs and to help them. But for Orang Asli children, this is not an option. Most of them do not have much access to these things. And the last problem is because of limited access to preschool as well. So in terms of parents' education level, parents who are less educated will have less capacity to be involved in their children. And I think previous studies have shown that OA parents also lack awareness of the importance of education. But some who are aware knows that they lack the ability. They want to help their children, but they do not know how to. So the third point is basically on birth registration. So as we know, being registered at birth is essential to protect the rights of children as citizens and to have access to education, healthcare, and other social services. So in a study done by Muhammad Noor and others, they found that there are cases where children fail to apply for aid because they do not possess the required documents. So this is an issue, although it's not direct to education, but is a prerequisite to access education. Next, we can look at the geographical barriers. So most of them live in more remote areas and lack of infrastructure utilities. So to give you an example of a case that Wong Abdullah has done in Posindirut, it takes 2 hours on a 4-wheel drive to go for the furthest village to school on dirt road, and the children could not go if it rains. So Dr. Sumati here has also done research on that as well. She found that some of the condition of the Orang Asli village is accessible by narrow road and has electricity and water supply, but there's lack of a landline, telephone, and they might have access to mobile phones. But some poorer villages have lesser infrastructure, where only a few houses have access to electricity and generators, and there's no treated water. So the primary source of water is from mountains and rainfalls and rivers. So in terms of the language and cultural barriers, I think much study has done on this. I think we have often talked about this as well. But I think it's time that we really understand and put into practice what we have discussed and talked about in literature so far and put into practice in policies. So according to Wahab Mustafa, the Orang Asli students have trouble understanding the lessons and instruction from their teachers because they speak different languages, and Malay is not their main medium of instruction. Malay is the main medium of instruction, and Malay is not their mother tongue. So it's very hard for a child that has not gone to preschool to go to school on the first day, and the teacher is speaking to you in a foreign language that you do not understand. So it is very difficult for them to adapt. And moreover, there are other challenges that they face on the first day of school as well. Yeah. So according to Colin Nicholas, I think the purpose of learning is for Orang Asli communities is to be a good Orang Asli, and they learn from their environment. So besides the language barrier, they also have this barrier of where adapting to learning from their environment, to go into school, to a very structured learning in school where you sit down and you listen to the teacher and lessons, and you might have to sit down for hours in school. So this is something that the children find very hard to adapt to. Then when they are in school, so these are more of the challenges that in accessing that. So but even when they are in school, they face certain problems like misalignment of mainstream education, curriculum and pedagogy to their culture. So one of the studies shown that of the teacher's response to why are they not learning, the teacher was saying that when they teach things related to the sea, imagine the Orang Asli students could not understand what is the sea because they have never seen it. But they can share enthusiastically about the jungle, which they are very accustomed to because that is basically their playground, right? So these are some of the things that we, as in the mainstream education, that we do not understand because it's a very different environment for them. And like I mentioned before, the classroom setting is foreign to them. And so in terms of some studies have shown that music, sports, and teaching materials from the environment would help them to learn better. Yeah. The next point is on poor working memory. I think sometimes it's mentioned, but not so emphasized in terms of malnutrition and how it could be one of the factors of the poor education attainment. I think this is something that we should look further into, like not just to say that, because one of the often complaint about Orang Asli children is that they could not retain what they remember, what is taught in classes. So is it a problem of low capability to understand or memory? But maybe it's also a problem of poor working memory due to lack of malnutrition. Yeah. So then we can look at challenges in school, that there are cases of bullying and discrimination because of their lifestyle. And also teachers feel stigmatized. Teachers who are posted there are often stigmatized to be punished. That's why they are there. So even if they are not, there is that kind of stigmatization that surrounds them, to feel that they are there because they are not the good ones. They are there because of punishment. And also in terms of the training and support from the teachers, it seems to be lacking. It's very hard for them to be able to understand the culture and lifestyle of the indigenous people if they are not trained. They do not receive enough training and support. I think we also have to understand that many of these teachers who are posted there are fresh graduates. So one is they are already not an experienced teacher, and they face additional challenges in terms of adapting to a new environment. And if there's not enough support and training for them to learn how to adapt to this new culture as well, it's very difficult for these new teachers to perform and cater a good quality education to these children. Next. Okay, so I've kind of mapped out the kind of policies and programs for Orang Asli communities. So if you look at the table, so JAQUA has, MOE, Ministry of Education, has taken over the responsibility of providing education to Orang Asli children since 1995. So ever since then, there is a series of policies and programs catered for Orang Asli children. So we can see the first one is in 1999, Special Program for Orang Asli students, which aims to improve mastery of 3M skills. The nature is more integration into the mainstream, because if they don't pass a certain level, if they don't achieve like 30% in the Bahasa Melayu and mathematics test, then they will be admitted to the special remedial class. Yeah, so it's like instead of 6 years primary education, they will have 7 years of primary education. So the next program started in 2003, so which is the Persiangan Salinantan program. It's not just for the Orang Asli, it's also for the children in the interiors of Peninsula Malaysia, which is the Orang Asli, and also the Orang Asal students in Sabah and Sarawak. So some of the in terms of the nature of the program, you can see that, yeah, it started to have this kind of indigenous pedagogy, like the thought of having an indigenous pedagogy for these children. So the aim is also to improve the academic achievement of students in interior areas. And they have modules on BM, English, science, and mathematics. So from the studies that have looked at the impact of this Persianan Salintantan program, they found that efforts were commendable, but the result shows that goals were not achieved. So there are some improvements, but it's not significant enough. Yeah. So still a big proportion of students do not do well. So although it seeks out to do an indigenous pedagogy, the teaching method is usually still resort to thinking that literacy is uniform, technical skills, and it does not consider the social practice and local context of students. But on the bright side is that teachers have responded to say that it helps with developing their planning and implementation skills in teaching and learning. Then next in 2006, we have Kiam to M, which is a reading and writing intervention class. This is a nationwide program, but for the Orang Asli, there's a more focused indigenous pedagogy. So intervention to develop basic reading and writing skills. Yeah, so the program is for Orang Asli students focused on the basic literacy in Bahasa Melayu and incorporating cross-curricular learning of using music, visual arts, and physical education in the learning of language and adopting the indigenous pedagogy. Yeah, so this is a nationwide program, and similarly to Persianan Salintantan, I think even the kind of results is quite similar as well. And some problems that were highlighted by previous studies is that high failure rate, large class size, and also the contents and materials suggested in the teaching learning process were not suitable. And there's also a lack of support system for teachers and monitoring of students' performance after the program. So then we have CUP, which is the integrated curriculum for Orang Asli and Penang schools in 2007. Also with a very similar aim and objective, which is to improve literacy and proficiency in 3M skills. And the nature is also focused on indigenous pedagogy. So the modules is developed based on the National Primary Curriculum, KBSR, and then KSSR. And then they also adopted the minimum adequate syllabus approach. So what does this mean? Minimum adequate syllabus means that the scope and the depth of content is lower than the mainstream syllabus. So some of the key things that have been highlighted from previous studies on the impact is basically that there are some results, as Malaysia Education Blueprint actually highlighted that after 6 years of implementing CUP in 6 Orang Asli schools, 3 schools have improved by 1 band. There are general improvement in basic literacy 3M skills, increase in attendance, but only if it is effective if the teachers customize the modules according to the students' needs. So some of the fall short of the program fall short in terms of the language level, which the module was not compatible with the language of the Orang Asli students, and this thing arise again, the need to be adapted to their culture and environment. And there's also a lack of guidance and support for the teachers. So, and this additional point raised up was an alternative syllabus that has a minimum adequate approach will put the Orang Asli at a disadvantage because what they learn is not on par with the mainstream students. But when they take UPSR, it's going to be the same questions. So these 3 are quite similar. Persianan Salintantan, KM2M, and CUP is quite similar in terms of the aim and objective, nature, and the structure. It's just that CUP is a more focus. It's just for the Orang Asli. Yeah. Then also at the same time, we have the special model K9 schools, which I mentioned just now, is a school that is from primary 1 to form 3. So the main objective is basically to reduce dropouts. So as we know that there's a high dropouts from primary 6 to form 1. Therefore, this school is put in place to have the continuity from primary 6 to form 1. So they will go to the same school, same K9 school until form 3. And then they will go to another secondary school in form 4 and form 5. And K9 schools also is a residential, provide residential facilities for the children. Then we have CADAP, which is another main program of Orang Asli adult. So it's basically to reduce illiteracy among the parents, to enable the parents to guide and motivate their children to go to school. I think it was mentioned in the challenges that one of the challenges that they face is basically they felt that they are not capable to help their children with their work. So this program basically has quite positive impact in the sense that teachers that teach these parents express that the parents show more confidence and interaction, and also parents appreciated the opportunity to learn with their children, and children also feel more motivated because of seeing their parents' motivation to learn. So that we have in 2013, when Malaysia Education Blueprint came into place, that's when we started the Orang Asli Transformation Plan, 2013 to 2018, which seeks to improve enrollment and attendance as well as learning outcomes. So it's a more clearer plan for Orang Asli. It's still a continuation of CAP, K9, and CADAP, but with more targets and monitoring of the progress. So we have like annual reports that have reports on the targets and the indicators, education indicators every year. And in 2018, the Ministry of Education revised CAP to become PCAP, Special Intervention Program for the Orang Asli and Indigenous communities, with the same aim and objectives. It's just a revised model of the previous one. So the paper looks a little bit into the performance during the Orang Asli Transformation Plan. So you can see from this during the 2013 to 2018, the attendance rates, which is the orange bar, has been increasing, and it's basically, there's a target. So every year there's an attendance rate target side by side with the attendance rate. So you see that they have hit the target in 2016. Yeah. Next. Yeah. So transition, as this, I think this, I've shown this graph just now, transition rates have dropped, but there's an increase in 2017. Yeah. Sorry, it's dropout rates have dropped and transition rates have improved. Yeah. So you're looking at the UPSR performance, so you can see the passing rate from 2013 has been almost, there's a slight improvement in 2015. You can see a 45%, but there's a big drop in 2017. But this drop is in tandem with the national passing rate as well. But the drop in terms of the Orang Asli is actually more significant and is a bigger percentage as compared to the national average. So you can see that in terms of, because attendance rates and the dropout rates is two indicators that is being progressed closely. The progress of these two indicators have been monitored closely. So this is something that we will talk about later. Yeah. So what did the paper found? I mean, what's the findings? So there are many findings. So these are just the key findings of the paper. So the first thing is the policies and progress have evolved. Yeah. So if you see in terms of the nature and the direction of the policies and programs, it have evolved from integration to mainstream. Integration to mainstream education to a more indigenous focused education. So you have the PKMOA, which seeks to integrate them into the mainstream education. Then they started to have a more indigenous focus, Persianan Salinantan program, and then the OA transformation plan. Then the next finding is that there needs to be a shift of focus of the educational policies and programs to address the underlying causes rather than the symptoms. So when we map up the challenges and all the policies and programs, is basically to look at how does this policies and programs actually cater and address the challenges. So for example, dropout and low performance in school are symptoms of the challenges that Orang Asli students face. It's not the underlying causes of. So we need to look at how these policies and programs can address the challenges rather than just addressing the symptoms. So as mentioned in the previous slides, we do track dropout rates consistently. We track attendance rate consistently. But what about the other challenges? Is there any indicators or is there any specific policies to cater to them? So we found that the KEDAP and PISM, which is a teacher training for Orang Asli community, is two of good programs which addresses challenges that the people faced. KEDAP is to improve, to address the problem of low literacy among the parents, and PISMP is basically to address the lack of Orang Asli teachers in these schools that understand their own culture. But in terms of K9 schools, we found that it addresses dropout, but it does not significantly resolve the challenges that the children face. Because dropout is caused by the challenges that they face. It's not the problem per se. So in terms of CARP, there are problems with the design of the program. So you can see that the intention is good, the objective is good, that it seeks to provide indigenous pedagogy for the children. But in terms of the implementation, there are gaps there, which many times when teachers do not receive enough training, enough support to teach and to provide indigenous pedagogy in their teaching and learning, that's when they resort to the methods that they know, so rote learning, they will start to memorize keywords. So this is not very helpful in their learning process, as how they are accustomed to more learning from the environment, more interactive learning, more music and play. So these are some of the problems of the design of the program. And that also lacks the lack of foundation and preschool education, which is that Orang Asli students actually do not start school at the same level as the others. Then the third finding is basically impact analysis and adjustment of specific policies and programs are needed to ensure that they address the challenges and new issues that arise. So these programs like CAPS, KIAM2M, and Persianan Salinanda improve the proficiency of basic literacy and numeracy skills. But like you can see from the series of the programs, it has not addressed sufficiently taken into account the lessons learned from previous programs. We have not adjusted the programs accordingly to address the problems that arise from previous programs, because they are of the similar nature, that it could have been adjusted and to address the problems of previous programs in the new programs. Next, there are gaps between policy programs and implementation on the ground, as mentioned. So CAP, KIAM2M, and Persianan Salinanda main issue is lack of local and indigenous context, when the irony is that they seek out to provide indigenous pedagogy and curriculum and inadequate training for teachers. So it's not entirely successful in that. And like mentioned, teachers need to be equipped and trained adequately and have clear guidelines on how to implement the module. And then the next point is on monitoring and evaluation must be strengthened by having a clear target and consistent comprehensive monitoring. So we see that dropout and transition rates and attendance have been consistently tracked, but there are some indicators which are very important that is not being tracked consistently, or we see them sometimes in certain annual reports. So for example, enrollment rates is not known. Why is enrollment rates important? Because we have the enrollment numbers, which is the number of Orang Asli students that attend school and are enrolled in school. But we do not know how many Orang Asli students have not been to school. So with enrollment rates there, we will know what's the percentage of Orang Asli students of school-going age in school at that time. So this is one of the missing indicators. And completion rate, which is also a very important indicator, is how many of them who started school complete their education. Of course, these are just indicators of access. We are not even talking about the quality of education or learning outcomes yet. So I think we have to be clear that it's just about the access. It's not to say that quality is not important, but there is, just looking at access, there are some missing gaps already. So in terms of clear target and progress monitoring is important. So if you see that how dropouts and attendance rate has been tracked. So just from the perspective of statistics, we understand that there are some problems with issues on the ground as well as to how it's being implemented. But just looking at the statistics, when we focus on certain indicators, we do have improvement in those. And there's more effort are being targeted to address those indicators. So what is needed is basically to look at the challenges and to address and focus the attention on the challenges instead. So, like mentioned about the enrollment rates, I think the Orang Asli children who have never been to school are not given sufficient attention in the policies and programs. So they are not part of the programs because these are all programs in schools. Yeah. So in terms of, we need to strengthen in terms of how understanding why are they not going to school. If they say they choose not to go to school, what are the reasons that they're not going or they're not interested in school? So voice, I think this is the key and main thing of the paper, basically, is the voice of the Orang Asli communities and their right to self-determination must be respected and included in the formulation of policies and programs. So we do see some consultation at national level, but I think it's also down to the state, district, and schools, how the schools work with the communities. I think there are some programs and guidelines for schools to work with the community, but it has to go from the policy program planning to the implementation. How do we consult the voices of Orang Asli and work together with them in order to educate the children? Yeah. So we do see like community learning centers that are starting around the communities, which is a more of a bottom-up approach where communities started their own learning centers with the help of some NGOs, which is mentioned in the paper as well. This is a very good initiative where it empowers the community because it's their project and they are still driving it. And at the same time, they learn how to run these community learning centers as well. So we need to respect and appreciate their culture. I think one thing that we often overlook is that they have a very good culture of what is learning to them is to be a good Orang Asli and emphasize on the responsibilities towards your community, which is, I think, is a very beautiful culture that we need to appreciate and learn from them. And the last point is the mismatch of the Orang Asli values and culture with mainstream education might suggest that a re-examination of the current education system of competition and competency. So is this just an Orang Asli problem, or does the other non-Indigenous students actually face some similar challenges? For example, does some of our students in the urban setting have this trouble of sitting long hours in a classroom setting? Is that a challenge of just an Orang Asli student, or actually many of our non-Indigenous students actually have these problems as well? So maybe it's time to rethink about how do we enhance creativity and critical thinking in our education system, which needs that space to explore, needs that space to feel and to experiment. So does our education system provide the avenue for them? So please download the paper at our website. And that's from me. Thank you. So now move to the panelists. Yeah, we have our esteemed panelists with us today, Prof. Bahari, Ms. Anne, and Dr. Sumati. Okay, we will start with Prof. Bahari. I think I've talked about quite long-winded about the challenges that they faced. I think COVID-19 has really exacerbated a lot of these challenges, like in terms of infrastructure, digital divide. So now we want to hear from our panelists, like themselves, their voices around the community, as well as Dr. Sumati, who has worked closely with the communities as well, to understand what are the impact of COVID-19 on them and challenges, and how could we address this? Yeah. Let me introduce our first panelist, Prof. Bahari. So Prof. Bahari is the first Orang Asli from the Semai community to complete a doctorate. He completed his degree in computer sciences in Australia in 1990, and then completed his PhD at Leeds University in the UK under USM's scheme Latihan Kakitangan Academy. So he began serving in USM in 1995, starting as a lecturer, and went on to hold administrative position in the university. In June 2020, he was appointed the Dean of the School of Computer Sciences, making him the first Orang Asli to hold such a position. And at the same time, he was also made the director of National Advanced IP Version 6 Center. Prof. Bahari is involved in various educational development activities focusing on the Orang Asli community through his involvement in organizations such as the Persatuan Orang Asli Semenanjung Malaysia, Persatuan Siswaza Orang Asli, dan Yayasan Orang Asli Perak. He also initiated many educational, cultural, and outreach activities between the School of Computer Sciences and the Orang Asli community of Tangkai, Germany. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Yasin, for a very nice introductions. First of all, I would like to thank Ideas for roping me in here. The research done, or the policy paper done by Yasin and the team looks quite comprehensive. Some of the issues that are actually nothing new to me. It has been there for decades, but it's good to revisit and to perhaps give a new perspective. So maybe a new thing can be done toward that. If I'd like to comment a little bit on your papers, from my perspective, I hope you don't mind. Looking at the data that you presented, it seemed to me, it appeared to me that most of the problem that you highlighted or the challenges that are highlighted, I mean, quite focused to the remote Orang Asli community. I just to share with the audience here, when we're talking about Orang Asli, I think it's the same for the Orang Asal in Sabah and Sarawak. We should also put into perspective there are actually a different group of Orang Aslis. Okay, those are in the remote areas, those are in the rurals, pinggir bandar, and maybe small portions that are residing in the bandar area. So if you look at these three different groups of so-called cohort of Orang Asli, so the challenges that they are facing, with regard to education would be different. Okay, and it's going to relate back to the issue about COVID and whatnot. I will go into that later. So to the Ideas team, thank you, congratulations for coming up with that policy paper. But it would be nice if we can break it down into that two cohort groups, then we can really see where the challenges are, the real challenges are. So I think most you highlighted is probably on the remote area, accessibility to basics, amenities like all this electricity, internet, and so on. Because when you go to rural, there are also a huge community Orang Asli that are in the pinggir bandar. They would also face some of the issues, but not as different challenges than those are in the remote areas. Internet access is still a problem. Now with COVID, a lot of jobs, a lot of people lost job and things like that. So accessibility to to the devices to get into use online learning and things like that also could be the issues. So that is perhaps a little bit just a small kind of feedback to what. By the way, it's very nice, very good presentation overall. Okay, I'm an Orang Asli myself. I grew up in the area. I would consider myself as very lucky. I grew up in the area where I mixed with different races, very small age. In fact, my primary school was already a Masyarakat Majmuk. So I mixed with Chinese, Indian, and so on. As I said, I'm lucky because I grew up in this area, and that area, it's an Orang Asli community, but then because of tin mining area during that time, so there are a lot of BJ Timah in our area, then the people come in and then start lombong sana, lombong sini. Well, we can, ada tempias kemajuan. I mean, we have so I can get engaged, mix with different races at a very early in my childhood age. And this helped, I tell you, this helped. Because I think one of the issues that you have touched is actually with regard to the, and I also saw there was a question from the audience with the preschool, yeah, kemas, tadika, and things like that. Actually, this helped. Though during my time there was no kemas or preschool, but by mingling around, mixing around, it's at least socially you are sort of well prepared when you go to the next level. You feel it from the beginning, because for the Orang Asli challenges actually double whammy or even triple whammy. Yeah? Accessibility is only one. I think Yasin, they already addressed that. When you come to the school, yeah, there is bullying, there is other things like quality and whatnot. All those things also come into the picture. So imagine that Orang Asli that go to the school, maybe he or she is prepared at least, in terms pakaian or everything is ready. But there's another hidden challenges or implicit challenges which not many people appreciate this. Because of your different, because of your culture, I think we will highlight a few things like that. So now they have to get to compatible level, so-called a safety net or social safety, only that they can excel. So this is the implicit, what do I say? The implicit challenges that not many people see it. Not, even the teachers not probably appreciate it. And therefore, I see there was some initiative that I saw from Mohi, and even there's a program, what is that, the teacher training for Orang Asli, which is akin to, for those of you who are a member, there's a hospital Orang Asli in Gombak. Long time ago, there's under British administrations. One of the names that I remember is Dr. Bolton. So he went to the Orang Asli villages, pick up those who are actually, who to his view can help the youth of Orang Asli, and he trained these people to become those time the medical aspect, to help the people who are having problem, Orang Asli who are having problem with their medical and so on. So he trained these people. So these people know the culture of Orang Asli, and then after that he sent them back to their community to help the hospital to manage their medical issues or health and things like that. So to me, it was very successful. I would have assumed that the same kind of strategy probably can be used for Orang Asli education. That can be worked out, and I see there are some moves toward that. Probably the same model, but in a new, how do you say, it's a new flavor, because now we are in the 21st century. Now, no, a lecturer, when he start talking, they can talk all sort of things. So I think I'm aware that I have very limited time. Now, with regard to COVID-19, I'm going back to the one that I framed it earlier. So you have a different cohort. Yeah, you have a remote, you have a rural, and you have a bandar. So each of these will have a different challenges. Now, thanks God, based on the report that we have so far, there are not many Orang Asli affected by COVID, as far as I know. There's a few cases in Selangor and also in Cameron Highland. Apart from that, the Orang Asli was not really that affected. So why I'm pointing out that point, because for the remote Orang Asli, in a sense, they are not really affected. So school should go on. Teachers should have the classes on, because that's the only time, the formal time, the learning time where the student can learn. Because the moment that they go out of school, that's it. For them, that is, they're not learning anymore. Learning on, I'm talking about formal learning. Formal learning already happened in the classroom. So to me, school in remote area should still going on, not affected. Yeah? We are not really affected. So in that sense, when we move to online teaching because of this MCO and whatnot, it's going to affect those in rural, rural pinggir bandar basically. This is, I think, the most affected people with regard to teaching and learning when we switch to the online. Okay. Now the challenge is, I think people already know about this. Although we have internet, but the internet may be slow. Devices to own by the student is quite limited, because only the adult actually holding all these devices. And when you come to student, you have to share with your parent. It's quite difficult. And our mindset was not prepared for that. And I believe not only Malaysia, not only the Orang Asli, is all over the world. If it's a problem of the world, because we are switching the mode of teaching. Remember that we have been, on this mode for ages, for how many 100 years already. So kind of difficult, and even let's know for Orang Asli even much more difficult. Despite what I'm telling that, I'm a computer science. I'm very biased. I see this is the moment, this is the right time for us to embrace this technology. Because if we have the infrastructure, we used to have last time Pusat Internet Satu Malaysia, and I know some area in Sungai Siput Utara, they have this menara that have been built and so on, but probably it's not been fully utilized. If we have these infrastructures ready, I think this with this technology, we could probably address some of the issues that in the policy paper they have been raised. For instance, attendance, dropout rate, maybe it's no longer an issue. I could be wrong. It's just like a school from anywhere, like work from home. So it's actually school from home, same concept. And then we could have teachers, Ministry of Higher Education probably don't have to worry now because teachers could volunteer. Talent of teachers can be everywhere, not maybe in Malaysia, maybe from overseas as well. So when we have this technology, they can deliver the quality content, relevant content quite easily. So they don't have to travel, 2 hours just now from Post End Road to the nearest sekolah, wasn't it? I think that was mentioned. So despite all this, I think this is the moment for us to embrace this technology. And it might solve the problem. It's probably it's a time for us to move to that. I know it's a big challenge. It's a tremendous challenge, that's for sure. What else? Maybe I stop there. Yeah? I have many things to talk, but let's give a chance to the other panel. Otherwise, lecture when you start talking, you never stop. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Prof. Yeah, I think it's very positive. I think this is the time that we can embrace this. And also coming back to the question on the urban one, yes, we recognize that because ours is more on a systematic review of the previous literature. So that is something that we feel is actually lacking in the literature itself, in the studies itself, which we want to look further in the fieldwork that when we go to the villages. So that I think there's only 2 schools considered as a sekolah bandar in Orang Asli schools. Yeah, so that is definitely one of the things that we want to look at, and the kind of the proximity from the towns as well. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. So next on the panel, we have Miss Anne, which is from East Malaysia. So Miss Anne Nasimbang is a founder and executive director for a local non-profit organization called Pakos Trust, or Partners of Community Organization, involved in rural indigenous communities development in Sabah. She is passionate in providing education for indigenous children and has set up 25 rural community learning centers in Sabah. These centers provide opportunity for children in remote areas of Sabah to have the best possible start in their education, and also for intergenerational transfer of indigenous knowledge. She is also a trainer in community organizing for Pakos and actively promotes gender awareness in the grassroots level as well as native customary land rights. Over to you, Ms. Anne.
First of all, thank you to Ideas for having me in the panel. And of course, Yashin, thank you so much for the comprehensive research. We really appreciate it. And it looks like a lot of your findings are also very similar. We have very similar situation in Sabah and Sarawak. I hope one day Ideas will also have some kind of research here also focusing on Sabah. Yeah, for your question, I go straight to the question that you asked just now, whether how severely are we impacted by the COVID-19, especially the learning of indigenous children. And as mentioned by earlier on, and it went into the media about a student, Viviana. Yeah, I think we are really impacted because if we want to talk about indigenous children, they're also in town. The accessibility is okay, so we don't need to worry about them. We are talking about indigenous children who are impacted, who are living in the rural areas and whose parents do not have high level of education, and also they are poor. Why? Because why are they impacted? Because school is the only structured learning for indigenous children if you are in the rural area. So during COVID-19, many of the learnings have to be online. And as Professor Bahari just now, if it is green area, we should not close the school. But obviously, whether you're affected by COVID or not in your area, everybody, the school are all closed. So people have to be on internet learning from home. And as we know, internet network is very limited in rural area in Sabah. They're either weak or unstable. So indigenous children are always left behind because they cannot access the learning that others are doing in in town or in cities. For instance, in my village, the children need to go to normally to find a spot. Normally here in my village, they go to the top of a hill, and parents normally build a small hut for them, and that's where they have internet access and then download the assignment. So that's one of the challenge that we are facing. And due to COVID-19, home learning is also a new norm. Where in the home learning, we need the supervision and support of parents. But many indigenous parents, they are unable to do this because they might not be able to understand what their children are doing, and so they cannot help them. And if they are poor, indigenous children may not have the access to equipment, especially computer and smartphones, and even if they have the phone are very basic. It's just for communication. So definitely we are very much impacted. But in terms of solution, we try here in PACOS, we try to do a lot of things, but because the education system is the only opportunity for us to learn lah. So, but I do see that our education system in Malaysia is very focused on the formal education, like, providing learning in school, colleges, or universities. And most of our country's education resources are supporting the formal learning. Whereas for indigenous communities, we can do better if government gives more emphasis on non-formal learning and lifelong education, like, countries in Indonesia and Thailand and Vietnam. Non-formal education is is very important, and they are given a lot of support. So in PACOS, we have started a community learning centers among indigenous communities in the rural area throughout Malaysia. And we can see that it has some positive impact. But of course, we need to have more detailed research to measure this though. And these learning centers are community run, and they're also community managed. And the teachers are from the community themselves, but they are trained to manage a classroom of learners. Another focus that we are embarking on is the education of girls and mothers. I think this is crucial in addressing the educational challenges of indigenous children. I remember my own experience where, although my mom was not educated, she took a lot of interest in what we are doing and we are doing in school. And she would ask us, even though she was very busy with housework, farming, and there were 13 of us in the family, but she made sure that we did our homework. She asked us, and we would tell her what we are doing, what we have learned, etc. So I think it's also mentioned in your research that maternal education is the 3 crucial determinants of cognitive function and educational attainment of indigenous children. So I think I'm very happy that you mentioned that in your research. We feel another solution would be the production of relevant learning materials to indigenous children through ethno-arts training. That's what we have doing here. This is supported by UNICEF. Teachers from our network of community learning centers produce learning materials for indigenous children, like some of the pictures behind me, if you can see there. These are drawn by the community learning center themselves. And these learning materials depicts their environment. And from our material trials with the community, we find that these materials invoke a lot of interest and conversation within indigenous children in the community. So from the ethno-art materials, we ask them question about how many, what do you see in the picture in their mother tongue? So from there, they learn numbers and they learn reading and they learn the alphabet just using those pictures. So I feel these are the kind of materials that we need to do. and to come up with for our indigenous children. We also want to lobby for quality and committed teachers who are interested to educate children. So we're happy that there are teachers going to the community willing to do, but as you mentioned, they are normally new, they're young and very inexperienced. And a lot of times in Sabah, the teachers who are not doing, who have problems with discipline are sent to the rural area as a punishment. So sometimes we don't get good and committed teachers. And because of our remote location and also the situation of poverty, teachers play a very important role in helping indigenous children succeed in their education. So at the moment, we are involved in a campaign called Tiada Guru to bring parents awareness on the importance of teachers going into their children's class to teach. So because in rural and remote communities, there is a high level of teacher absenteeism. Like in many villages, although the teachers are from that community also, but some of them get drunk and then they don't go into the class. So we have a lot of that issue, and so children may go to school but they're not learning. So through the campaign called Tiada Guru, we hope that parents will take interest in their child's learning. They will ask them what's happening in school, and if a teacher does not come into the class, they can tell their parents, and we encourage parents to report them to authority or send to us. So those are some of the things we try to address the challenges. We are still a long way to go. Very thankful that we are now talking about this openly. Like some of us, we are lucky, like Prof. Bahari, we are more nearer to town and we had the opportunity to have good education. And but there are many more communities in the rural area in Sabah and Sarawak, actually, who is facing a lot of issue on education. I think I'll stop here for a while and we hear from the other panel.
Thank you, Ms. Anne.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to hear of what Pakos Trust is doing as well on the ground. Yeah. So next we will move to Dr. Sumati. Dr. Sumati is an assistant professor at the Department of Languages and Linguistics, University Tunku Abdul Rahman, Utah Campus College. Campus. She received her PhD in education from King's College London. Her work with the Indigenous Semai Orang Asli since 2008 has ranged across literacy, language documentation, and educational issues in school. She was also a visiting research fellow with the Centre for Aboriginal Economic Policy Research, Australia National University. She has published various articles related to Orang Asli and education. In her forthcoming book chapter entitled Where Literacy Practices Collide, exploring the relationship between homeschool literacy practices of minority Indigenous children from underprivileged background, and it will be published soon. So over to you, Dr. Sumati.
Okay, thank you very much, Yashin, and thank you very much to the other panelists as well. Yashin's documentation of all the research that currently you have gathered gives a very good overview of the kind of research that's being done on the Orang Asli community. And I think just like Yashin, people will be wondering, I'm not an Orang Asli, like, why the interest to work with education and Orang Asli children? I think I didn't set off to do that. I was working in Perak, and I'm not a Perakian. And when I came back after finishing my PhD, I was teaching not with Utah at that time, with a very privileged university in Perak, and I was teaching very privileged undergraduate students. So, and then there was an article in the newspaper at that time. The highest dropout rate is among the Orang Asli, and like Yashin's report shows, in Perak you have the second largest Orang Asli community. So then I thought that if I'm I got this opportunity to do education and come back, and I want to sort of contribute, maybe the best challenge would be to see what is the issue with education among these underprivileged students who are having such a high rate of failure. But in Malaysia, if you are educated, if you have a master's or a PhD, you don't teach in primary schools. You don't have that opportunity. So even though I was educated as an English language teacher, I taught in a secondary school. So I am a kind of a cautious person. So rather than saying that I am here to help people who are in need, I say I better, step back and see how my expertise would be of use. So I started off at that time. In 2008, not much was written about the Orang Asli community. I read. I think the main text that I read was from Colin Nicholas. And then there were a few articles from Professor Hood Saleh, okay, but they did more on ethnography study, not much on education. So I thought if I were to know about education for Indigenous community, then I think all these years I learned through my research and through my reading. So I got an attachment to Center for Aboriginal Economic Policy Research in Australian National University. And I was the only person in the field of education working among anthropologists, linguistic anthropologists, economists. So I talked to a lot of people, okay, and then I came back. And at that time in Australia, not many people knew about the Orang Asli community in Malaysia. So Indigenous Australians, they also have various different languages. So a bit different from like New Zealand, because education is easier because they all speak the same language. So policies are easier. Or if you talk about First Nations in Canada, I think in history itself, they have treaties. So there's empowerment regarding land rights and things like that. But in Malaysia, we didn't have that. So I wanted to know, what is happening. So even if you read a lot, you won't know what is happening until you are on the ground. So I thought I will do some observation in school. So that's what I did. I went to Jabatan Pendidikan in Perak and asked them, because at that time you don't have access to, all these databases where you know where schools are. And so I did that. I found the school. I went with Jabatan Orang Asli at that time. Okay, so they took me there to the village, and then I found the school, and I thought, since I'm an outsider, schools are a culture by itself, and you're familiar because you will have classrooms, you have teachers. Okay, so I sat for 6 months on and off, in the classes, observing the teacher, observing the children. You must understand that, I come here as an educator and a researcher. So I think Prof. Bahari would know that, if we are lecturers, our main, work is we teach, we do a lot of things. So this is, if you have to go to school, then you need that access. I know Yashin put the point of reference as COVID-19, but you need to know before so that then you can see how has it impacted. So communities like the Orang Asli, the one that I went in 2008, I was a regular person there for 12 years before I changed to UPSR. Okay, so mine is a longitudinal study. So in your report, Yashin shows so many very, very good programs by Ministry of Education or Jabatan Haliwal or Asli programs and policies. For me, when I go to the school, then I need to see how are these policies cascaded to actually in classrooms for the children. Okay, so that's how I started, and that's why what I'm talking here, don't take it as a generalization, because it's very limited to my case study in Perak with a very small community of Orang Asli. I think you need to bear that in mind. Okay, so these children, since 2008, I've been with them, and I still keep in touch with them until today. And some of them are married, have children. So it has been that long. Okay, and many have dropped out as well. So it's a very, very complex issue. But like Prof. Bahari said about, rural and remote and urban. But if you understand schools for the Orang Asli, the primary school, I'm not talking about the K9, okay, they are all rural, okay? And Malaysia doesn't distinguish rurality, remote rural, or what we call as remote, schools. Because when I was in Australia, when I did a presentation and I said that it is remote, then my colleagues there say like, Peninsula Malaysia, it is so small compared to Australia. What do you mean by remote? So 2 hours, 3 hours, access or no access to a village or a school, that's called remote. And then they say that in Australia, it will be like 8 to 9 hours on dirt road. That would be called remote. So you can understand that if schools in Malaysia, especially the Orang Asli schools, they are considered as rural, then we also need to know why is access like for internet and proper technology infrastructure is so difficult. Because from my study, we have, I know you put there are 28 schools, but recently, I think last year when I checked the database, which is another thing, to get access to data, okay, credible data is also very difficult, okay. So out of the 26 schools that I identified in Perak, and all of them are considered as rural schools, 25 of them are what they categorize as underperforming because of UPSR, okay? And none of the schools have landline. You cannot, as a researcher, if I want to go to a school, I cannot make an appointment over the phone, okay? So if they don't have landline, then definitely they don't have internet access. So when I was working, or when I was working with the Orang Asli community in the village that I went for the past 12 years, every time I take my handphone, okay, then you don't have signal. So I have to tell my, head of department or my family that from this time to this time, don't try to reach me, okay? So it worked. I mean, I'm telling you from, as it is, like what I experienced. And the same thing, like now I'm starting a project with another Orang Asli school. And you must understand, researchers like me who researchers, but we are also educators and we are lecturers in university. We need access if we want to do research. So the nearest school that I found is another 40 minutes one way to go to. And again, there's no line. You have to make an appointment, okay? And the difficulty is, it is too complex, okay? If only we can say that, if we do this, if we change the curriculum, we change the syllabus, if we teach in using Orang Asli languages, then it would work. But it's too many things are happening at the same time. So what I have decided and I have learned throughout my research is you take as what it is and you make it better. So the current project that I'm doing when I went to the school, because I'm a trained English language teacher, so the teachers, you don't get English language teachers sent to schools like this. So that's why it is very, very difficult. I know my time is up and usually I get very excited. Okay, just give me 2 minutes. Okay, so what I do is then I decided, I always ask them, okay, I'm here volunteer and a volunteer team teach with the class teacher to understand the difficulties that the teachers have. And I ask them what kind of help can university provide, to the school. So, and then we discussed that, but because of COVID, okay, it stopped. And exactly like you said, are they affected? I'm very happy that they are not like urban children who are confined in a flat where there are 6 kids. These children have rivers and their well-being, they can go out and that's a positive thing. But I am totally cut off from the school. Okay, the only way I communicate is through handphone. Okay, and I have a teacher who I team taught with him that we are keeping in touch. And the moment this CNCO is over, then we will start with the project. But it's basically to help teachers to prepare teaching materials that can help them with their teaching. Okay, I'll stop here and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sumarti. Yeah, I think there are many questions from the floor and we are also running out of time. So maybe we just go to the question straight away. I think there's a question from Prof. Bahari on internet access. So the participant actually asked, there is, I think the main issue problem faced, especially by Indigenous. Sorry, it just jumped. Technical error. Okay. Sorry, I think the question disappeared. Okay. So this second question, since language barrier is one of the challenges faced by Indigenous children, where do primary and secondary teachers get their certification? And maybe, are there any ways to improve training for teachers teaching Indigenous languages? And also, I think it's more on the question of how do we incorporate this into education, maybe, yeah. We're open to all panelists. Maybe Prof. Bahari, do you have any thoughts on that? Like in terms of how do we incorporate Indigenous languages into the mainstream as well?
Okay, thank you for the questions. I believe at least in under the Kementerian Pendidikan Malaysia, I think there was actually some attempts to come up with the books in Bahasa Semai. That's what I know. At least for tahun 1, tahun 2, tahun 3, and even now tingkatan 3, and then they're working now on tingkatan 5. So there are already some works on that, and I have seen actually have been taught also in the Sekolah Orang Asli on using Bahasa Semai to teach not only Bahasa, but they just inculcate into science and also maths. There was a attempt on that, but that's only part of it. The other one is, of course, I think Yasin already highlighted it earlier. And under the teacher college, Tengku Abzan, Tengku Abzan, they actually training they pick up potential Orang Asli teachers to be teach as a teachers, then to be sent to the Sekolah Orang Asli. So this is actually another attempt that have been done along that line. I think that those are two that I'm aware of. Yeah, that's probably I can share.
Thank you, Prof. Yeah, there's a question to add about teacher absenteeism. I think, what are the accountability measures that exist to remedy this problem about the teacher being absent from school? What do you think in terms of, is there any accountability measure, or is there any measure or solution that has been done?
Well, at the moment, here in Sabah, we have one case where a student sued the teachers and the school and even the education department for the teacher absenteeism. So that court case is ongoing. But so far, because absenteeism have been going on for a long time, and we have parents complaining. But at the same time, some of them are also they are not sure whether their children will be protected. They're always scared that, their children might be victimized if they report the case to the higher authority. There are also PIBG members who have mentioned that they did report to authority, but they have not seen any action yet. Yeah, there is supposed to be, there's supposed to be action taken against a teacher if they do not go into class. But at the moment, we have not seen that happening yet. But I guess if more parents speak about it, the public speak about it, then maybe the system can be more accountable. It's because all this while, people also do not talk about this issue. So only when this one student who complained and then eventually when sued the education department, that now people are more more talking about it. So I think we hope more people will come forward lah, more especially parents.
Thank you. There's a question for Dr. Sumati on how much community input did you observe going into policy formulation? I think it's quite an interesting one to see how much actually, because we always talk about consultation. So how much actually has been being incorporated into policy? I mean, from your experience.
Okay, policy is up there, okay? From what I see on the ground is when a teacher goes into classrooms and meets the Orang Asli children, it goes back to the school and the teacher and what he or she has planned for that day. So policy can have all these sometimes wonderful things, okay? But if you ask me, frankly, I have not seen it. I really feel that everybody, and I'm not, it's easy to point a finger and say that this is this person's fault or that person's fault, but it's not. It's too complex because I also do research with rural communities. So not only Orang Asli, because if you compare Orang Asli and urban, then maybe you can see this gap that Yashin shows. But you'll be surprised that in Malaysia, in rural primary schools, Malay students can't read and write Malay. So we have a huge problem and difficulty. So that is if you talk about policies, I'm sure we have good program, but one thing that I find is a weakness, and I think Yashin would agree with me, is all these programs, you need it to be audited. You need to evaluate and see to what extent they really worked and who are, how the implementation is. I think that is very lacking, and researchers like me, we don't have the data, and we really have to find out. I think that's one. And the other one is the community, the Orang Asli community themselves. They must be empowered, okay? And I think Jakwa or whoever should have an education committee with each village, so that people like us, so the school is not isolated from the community. Although government keep on saying that they need to work together, but from the Orang Asli point of view, education is a space that they're not very good at, so they can't come up with their own ideas. So there must be concrete kind of program that bridges this two. And I, because you see, outsider like me, if I go to the community, once an outsider leaves, then whatever project or program I do collapses, because the Orang Asli community themselves are very shy to do it. So that's very difficult. So that's what I face. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to draw back to COVID-19 as well. Like in terms of any assistance and support from the government to the community, Indigenous community, maybe Prof. Bahari and can you just enlighten us of what's your knowledge about like what's happening on the ground? Is the assistance and support being reached? Has it reached the people? If not, then what are some of the things that we could look into? I mean, as a community as a whole, yeah.
Right, thank you, Yasin. Yes, I'm involved in various groups under WhatsApp. So even though I'm sitting here in Penang, but I'm pretty aware what's going on. I mean, the grassroots actually reporting, sharing, and that's the beauty of this social network and whatnot. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, it's like COVID case sporadic. I think that's the best word you use. It's very sporadic. Most, I think, at least in the rural area, they have received all these bekalan bakul makanan, at least from Jakwa and from some NGOs. But I believe those in the rural, in the remote areas, that is the problem, that's the challenge. But I'm aware that some of the NGOs, like for instance, and the COAC, Center for Orang Asli Concern, they have a vast network of their volunteers and local champion. That's another thing that we should have stressed here. These are the people actually who helping this whatever bantuan help to get to the grassroots. So I'm aware that that's going on. But I believe it's quite sporadic. It's only in the rural area, but not in the remote area. For the other form of aids or bantuan, we hear about all these BSH, bantuan sara hidup, and other things like the internet discount given by some of these service providers. I don't think that one. I don't know. I don't have the data. I'm not sure whether that's actually have been distributed or been received by the targeted community.
Thank you, Prof. What about over in East Malaysia?
Yeah, I think in Sabah, we also have the bantuan, the food baskets in the villages, in the kampung, in rural area. Of course, same as Prof. Bahari was saying, in remote area normally is quite difficult to reach. But here, the government is providing that through the MPKK. And there are also many groups who are providing food basket, but sometimes it's slow. So, but of course, a food basket is not sustainable. It's very, it's just an immediate need. Other things like the BSH, of course, the bantuan sara hidup, if you do not have internet access, you will not be able to apply for that one. The other thing that was provided by the government, if I remember, was the discount, internet discount. Because the internet is very slow in the kampung, so sometimes it does not work. Yeah, but those are the things that is very helpful actually. And if we can get some companies like Maxis are also trying to help by providing this mesat, this where people can buy and pay. But if it requires buying and paying, and if you are poor, you still cannot access that. So those are things that we know that done here in Sabah.
Is there any on education per se that has been done on the ground?
Yeah, I think for education, I see a lot of the teachers try to send their work through WhatsApp. Yeah, and then parents download, or the children download, and we have to print it or do it online, and they send it back to the teacher. And so it's again related to having access to internet. So and having a smartphone. So you can see we're very much disadvantaged when it comes to into that kind of learning. So if we have books, we were having some discussion recently that some of the parents suggest that, why can't there be the children in the kampung be given a book while during this COVID time when the schools are closed, and they do that work but of course they said then they try to ask them if they have questions using WhatsApp if they encounter any problem. So instead of downloading and stuff like that, but rather they have some books or worksheets that they can work on. So those are suggestions from the parents during our discussion.
Is there any from the Orang Aslis, like in terms of educational assistance and support throughout this time?
If I can jump in before Dr. Sumati can give a comment. Not that I'm aware of, but I think this is where the local community can play their bigger roles. When I say local community, the institution and local community like Majlis Keselamatan Kampung Orang Asli MPPK OA, which comprises of Batin and Pengurusi MPPK, they can play a bigger role here. This is the time where we need these people to work. They could make an effort, for instance, to get to the school to collect all the material physically. And bring it and then place in the common area like in Dewan or whatever, and then have schedule a time, a meeting. I think this momentum has to be keep going. We can't wait until everything fine and then start school. That's too late already. This one has to go on. And at least I know that in my village, the people have been doing that, which was good. And I think it's good. It's because it keeps the momentum. At least the children's has this at the back of their mind that they, just following this sort of routine lesson, from one time to another time, so they don't just get shocked when everything not really going back to normal. I don't think going back to normal. It has to be have to a new normal. Yeah. Not that I'm aware of. Sorry, I cannot answer you that question.
Sure. Dr. Sumati, is there any news on that from your side?
What I know is from the school where I'm supposed to do the project, which stopped because of the COVID. The teachers went back to the school. The teachers are in school, so lessons are still on. So for those kind of schools, because they don't even have the internet, so once the teachers are back, then classes go on as normal. So it's only during that period where, total cut off, then when, like Anne was saying, when you don't have internet access, then it's impossible. So like Prof. Bahari said, this is where I also truly believe that the community is where they can step in. So school needs to establish this strong link with the community. Yeah.
So is there, from the school side, maybe Dr. Sumati, is there any basically there's this whole thing about dropouts after post COVID-19. Is there anything from the school side that you see that is the possibility of something like that happening? I mean,
it could. It could.
Or maybe from the community side, like.
Yeah, I am supposed to go to school. The school next week. To check things out. But it could definitely, once there is no education, because like Prof. Bahari or Anne would say, outside of school, education is among the Orang Asli community, it's the formal education that matters. Okay, we can talk about exam-oriented, it shouldn't be and whatsoever, but at the end of it, it is. So I'm sure there would be, a higher dropout rate in schools. Yeah. Yes.
I think some of the participants has highlighted also about what can civil society and NGO contribute to contextualize the education pedagogy for Indigenous children in the past, and how can we move this forward? I think also on the COVID-19 situation, I think how can the others come in to contribute? I think there are also many parties that actually want to contribute, and many on the ground NGOs are working. And how can we move better moving forward and provide and reach out to the Indigenous communities? Maybe Anne can start on that.
Okay. How can we move forward, and what can other people outside our community, apart from Indigenous, people who are non-Indigenous, help and support us, especially our children's education? I think the first thing is, like, even if I listen to Sumati, initially she was not involved in Orang Asli. She was not interested, but because she got involved with them, so she knows about them. So itu ada orang bilang tidak kenal maka tidak cinta. Itu betul itu. So I feel as an Indigenous person myself, we need to create that relationship and interest in the lives of indigenous people. Just like Yashin was saying, is the part of the Malaysian society. So we need to have that consciousness also, and the overall society also need to understand our way of life and our issues, our challenges. And only if you understand that and you have that empathy, then you have that commitment. And I think that's when you can support. So that sometimes that's how I feel. People, an outsider will tell us, do this, do that. But, we cannot understand it because, the way of life is different. So I remember myself when I was a small kid, a long time ago in the 70s or in the 60s, we have this what we call pen pal. People write to each other. I had a pen pal in Finland. I had a pen pal in South Africa. So because of that, I wanted to know more about the country. I wanted to know more about apartheid. So I don't know if we can form that relationship and interest towards, a community, just like Sumati is going to the kampung already and looking at the community. So I think that relationship need to be built, and so that we become part of this big family, and so that outsiders, people, the general public in Malaysia can highlight our challenges. Like today, I think the forum today is very good because you are talking about our challenges. You are talking about the indigenous peoples and the children and our education. So by highlighting our challenges, supporting us, and you can also advocate for our issue, because we are a minority in Malaysia. We are not big in number, though we are big in Sabah and Sarawak, but overall in Malaysia, our numbers are small. So we need all the support we can. And to be able to support and to move forward together, I think knowing and creating that relationship is very important. So that's that's what I think lah.
Thank you, Anne. Prof. Bahari, do you have any thoughts on that?
Excellent idea. And pen pal, I don't know, in the 21st century. I like that. I think someone has to lead this. Excellent idea. That's how you get connected. The young youths, especially now, with very much into these gadgets and so that will be excellent idea. I think it's a very good idea. Okay. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank all the Malaysians, maybe on behalf of the Orang Asli. I think there are a few those who are concerned Malaysians who have shown a lot of support. The example is, as of today, Yasin, Dr. Sumati, and a few others behind the scenes. And they are well intended, yeah, to help the understanding the situation and whatnot. If you ask Jakwa, I know the pengarah is Professor Julie Edo. I think, in terms of Orang Asli at least, there are many well-meaning people who want to help the Orang Asli. And in one of the talk that I listened to when people ask about these questions, he said the main problem is coordinations. That's one, at least from the management point of view, from this agency point of view. But from the perspective of Orang Asli, I think Dr. Sumati did touch this. They are shy. They have their own culture and whatnot. And the other important thing is trust. Yeah? And remember that this community has been exposed to this so-called outside or external for quite a long time. So they have received all sort of experience, the good one, the bad one, and so on. So building a trust is very, very important. I know that the Malaysian has well intended to help, but then it takes time. It takes time. It has to be a very sustainable kind of assistance or help. I can quote my example. For instance, I think you read the profile earlier. We had very close engagement with the Orang Asli Tangkai Cermin community since 2013, and it's been going on until now. Even I am from that community. The reception is quite difficult for my colleague because it requires trust. So find, I think we have to find a proper channel how to communicate with these people. I take the point that Anne mentioned earlier. You have to understand their need. Is not just just come and then okay, let's do this. No, it doesn't work like that. Trust has to be established. This is quite sensitive in a sense, yeah. And I know because I came from the same community. At least for SMI, I know that they are very polite, but once they distrust you, that's it. But then, having said that, for the community also, there are all sorts of them, you know. So that is another issue. Okay, I think that's what I'm going to share.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Hari. Dr. Sumati, any last words on this?
Yeah, I think like non-Indigenous people like Yashin, myself, I think what we can do is you don't have to do something very big, you know, something that can start very small. But I agree with Prof. Hari, you know, working with one community for, you know, 12 years, the trust, you know, what you heard in the first year, you know, it's not exactly, because it's not that they are planning to hide things or whatever, but it's being very protective because of their experiences and the history that they come. And I think I was very lucky because I work with children, so the children grew with knowing me, you know, so we have that understanding. And I work in a village that was 200 years old. So the kid that I observed in 2008 was the first student to go overseas, and she's studying now in Australia. So she still keep in touch, and she was saying that I think maybe Prof. Hari would agree. Like they also have this stigmatization that Orang Asli are looked differently. But you must understand, people like us, we have our own worldview, how we are brought up. So you cannot go into a community and you say that, you know, what they're doing is wrong, or, you know, it's not right. It's like my experience with my mom, you know, how she tells me certain things, it's the way she was brought up. So it's the same kind of thing. So, you know, but what, I just talked to her like last month, and she was saying that, you know, in some ways she felt so glad to have an identity as an undergraduate, rather than being in a school where they are always categorized as Orang Asli and looked differently. You need to have a very strong identity and determination among Orang Asli when they go to secondary school to excel, because the kind of atmosphere they are a minority and they're different. So for non-Indigenous community who wants to help, you must have that respect. Okay, I don't think there is any way we can reach equality, because it's impossible. Equality means somebody is good there and we are hoping for that, but who are you to say that? So for me is work with what you have and make things better. So as long as any member can think that, and always ask them what they need, rather than saying that I know this way and let's do this. It doesn't work that way. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sumati. I think it's all the panel sums up beautifully, in the sense that it's about the relationship, it's about the trust, and it's about understanding each other. I think also the reconciliation of, it's not just us against them, but it's about us as Malaysians. It's about East Malaysia and West Malaysia coming together, Indigenous and non-Indigenous coming together. How do we build that understanding? I think Anne said very nicely, tak kenal maka tak cinta kan. So we need to start understanding each other. I think that is the basis of it. And thank you for joining us today. I think this is the start of our journey as an organization, as for myself as well. I think thank you for participating in this journey. And we want to not just leave it as it is, I think after this, and then we go back to where we were doing and what we were doing, but it's how we continue this conversation. We continue to know each other, different fragments of the society in Malaysia. Yeah. Thank you for participating, and thank you to the panelists for contributions of what you have said, and you're sharing your experiences and what you think. Thank you so much. Thank you. I think, yeah, and I have a good lunch right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.